And the antibiotic question is a real one. When I mentioned that 1% of doctors are referring that antibiotics are causing more problems than they ever cured. What do I mean by that, and what do they mean by that? When you take an antibiotic into your body, you're actually putting a mold waste into your body, as I showed you. And how many people have had antibiotics and then they get thrush? Yeah? Or a mother has antibiotics and her baby gets thrush because you're putting a mold waste into your body. That's what the doctors are referring to. And there's a link today linking cancer with fungus. And if you put fungus and cancer into the web, you'll get a whole area of things. I have a few books at my health retreat that are from different doctors, different professors over the world that are showing this. You see, Louis Pasteur believed in monomorphism. Mono means one, morphism, one form. Louis Pasteur, he presented that only ever is a bacteria and it only ever will be a bacteria. But there is another class of people who believe that in pleomorphism. Pleo means many, meaning it's not just ever going to be a bacteria. Under different conditions, this bacteria can change into yeast and fungus, and we know in the cycle of life that's exactly what it does. Unfortunately, in medicine today, because the pharmaceutical companies play a large role in what doctors are taught, and what doctors are taught are basically based on the germ theory, and for doctors to acknowledge, or medicine as a whole, the role of yeast and fungus in disease, they would also have to acknowledge that some of their main drugs are putting it into the body, like your antibiotics, like your statin drugs, like your contraceptive pill, like your cortisones. But as you can see by what I showed you, with the basic foundation of the cycle of life, it's important to understand that so that you understand the role that they play in disease. Now, yeast and fungus, they can get into the body in 4 ways. It can get into the body through inhalation. So if you've got a mouldy orange in your fruit bowl, don't touch it because it can get in through your skin. So what do? You actually put a mask on, get some tongs, pick it up, and dispose of it outside the house. It's toxic stuff. So you can inhale it, you can ingest it. Don't touch anything that has mold on it because mold is toxic. Now, if a person has strong hydrochloric acid, it can actually kill the mold. But as you'll see on Friday night when I look at the gut, not a lot of people have strong hydrochloric acid anymore. If someone says to me, I've got too much acid in my stomach, I say fantastic, because that's what breaks your protein down. But I've actually never met anyone with too much acid. I'd say to someone, how do you know it's acid? Well, it keeps coming up. Well, that's not the acid. The problem is the little gate there. And the little gate, if it's working well, should stop any acid coming up. Now, what you have to go way back to is why are these things so? Why are these things happening? So 4 ways mold can get into your stomach: through inhalation, through ingestion, through the skin, and also sexually. And when it comes into the body, it can play havoc in the body. And there's a book that I have called The Germ That Causes Cancer, and it's by Doug Hoffman, who works with a Dr. Holland. The Germ That Causes Cancer. And he has a chapter that goes through the streams of time, 19th century, through the streams of time, 20th century. And he shows that when we went from the 19th to the 20th century, medicine and science alike agreed that cancer was a fungus. So what happened? Well, in the early so from the 19th to the early mid-1900s, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds came in, and where did they fund the research to go? To chemotherapy, to radiotherapy, to surgery. So in cancer treatments today, you've got slash, poison and burn. I mean surgery and chemotherapy and radiotherapy. Between 1998 and 2004, Dr. Graham Morgan, who's an oncologist from Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney, and another couple of Sydney oncologists, they had a look at chemotherapy, and they found that 5 years after chemotherapy there was a 2.5% survival rate. Now that is shocking news. Now not every cancer has such a low survival rate, but I think the highest survival rate was just something like 5 years after chemo, maybe a 10 or 20% survival rate. There are people that survive after chemo, but most of the time it's because they've changed their life. They've changed their lifestyle. You see, if you don't turn the tap off, you're going to still be mopping up in the other corner. And one person said to me, Barbara, you can't blame everything on fungus. Well, the fact is fungus is just an opportunist organism. It's just going to be around where it is well fed. How do you know if fungus is in the body? And by the way, you can have a yeast problem in the body and not have cancer, but it certainly can develop to cancer if it's given the right conditions. So how do you know? Your tongue is a good guide. Your tongue should be pink from the tip to the back. And if it is coated and you can scrape the coat off, that is waste. But if you can't scrape the coat off, they are little fungus buds on the back of the tongue. So we've looked at how it can come into the body. Now I'd like to show you how you can get it out of the body. But before I do that, let me tell you one story that shows the danger of mould. And a lot of people don't realise how dangerous this stuff is. And this is why I have written a book on the subject. And the book, Self-Heal by Design, up the back, the role of microorganisms in disease, I basically explore what you're hearing tonight in greater detail, and I have the research and a little bit more of the background around it. Now this happened 5 years ago. It happened in a little town of Toowoomba in Queensland. There was a silo that had water damage. So what happens in a silo when there's water damage? Mould. So what do they do with the mouldy grain? Well, you can't feed humans, and you know that not even a pig will eat mouldy grain. They've even coated it with molasses and won't eat it. So what are we going to do with this mouldy grain? Oh, we'll make beer out of it. So then we're left with, once the roof was fixed on the silo, then the inside of the silo, which was white, what's the white? Mould, had to be cleaned. So 3 men were asked to do it. The 3 men had a look at it. 2 of the men said, I'm going to put protective clothing on. The 3rd man said, this won't take long. So the 2 men went off to get their clothing on, and the 3rd man went in with the shovel to start shoveling off this white mouldy build-up on the walls of the silo. When the 2 men came back, they looked like they were about to walk on Mars. They were totally covered with breathing apparatus. They came into the room and their friend was lying down. They ran over to him. He was dead. What happened to him? When he put the shovel in, he caused a big release of this mould waste. It went in through his skin. He breathed it. He swallowed, basically, he had an anaphylactic reaction and he died. So this stuff is toxic. That man obviously had a big overload. And you've probably heard and maybe experienced that in schools today, peanuts are banned. Does that happen in New Zealand? Certainly in Australia. Do you know there's nothing wrong with a peanut? Peanuts are not a nut, they are a legume and they grow in the ground. So they mould very, very easily. And it is not the peanut that kills, it's the mould waste on the peanut. And the peanut grows a mould called aspergillus, and it gives off a mould waste called aflatoxin. Aflatoxin is the most carcinogenic substance that has ever been tested. Now, different moulds have effects on different body parts. And the China study, which is a book by Dr. Colin Campbell, he shows in there that children were dying in the Philippines between 8 and 10 years of age from liver cancer, and they traced it to the aflatoxin in the peanut butter. And he came to the conclusion that it must be the poorer children that were dying, but it was the wealthy children that were dying, and the wealthy children were eating what Time magazine called the meat sweet diet. A high meat, high sweet, and yet the children in the country were eating a natural diet of lots of greens and maybe seaweeds and a little bit of fish, a little bit of soy, and they were not dying. And this shocked Colin Campbell because he was trained in med school that you got to have meat for your protein and you got to have dairy for your calcium. But he found in his research that he could switch cancer on or off by the amount of meat and dairy products that he was giving the rats. Just incredible. In fact, he would inject them all with aflatoxin. And the ones on 5% animal protein did not get the cancer. The ones on 20% animal protein were all died from the liver cancer. And he would do another research. He'd give the rats 5% animal protein for the first year, no cancer. Second year, he'd change it to 20% animal protein, they all died of liver cancer. So can you see he could turn cancer on and off? Again, genetics slows the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. But here, it's the germ. He injected every rat with aflatoxin. In other words, they'll only live where they're getting well fed.
In this video, Barbara sheds light on the intriguing hypothesis that cancer may have fungal origins, challenging conventional perspectives and opening new avenues for research. By understanding the potential role of fungi in cancer, we move closer to uncovering innovative strategies for prevention and healing. Barbara's insights encourage us to consider how we can incorporate lifestyle changes to minimize fungal exposure, fostering a healthier and more resilient body.